All right, so now on to Blaise Pascal. Again, like Descartes, a mathematician, he's a contemporary of Descartes. And remember, Descartes kind of building off of Anselm's proof of the existence of God. Pascal, like I said, is not really proving the existence of God. In fact, he's very critical of attempts to prove the existence of God. And Pascal was kind of the inventor of game theory. So one of my mathematician friends, as if mathematicians have friends, but let's presume they do, is big into game theory. That's kind of his area of expertise, and he loves the fact that I talk about Pascal, even if it's not as mathematics. But it kind of sort of is. His mathematics and his apologetics kind of go hand in hand, as we'll see. There's also some scientific method here. Schrappe doesn't think Pascal gets quite the credit he deserves for his philosophy, because it's not necessarily proving something, which to many people means it's not real philosophy, right? Think back to Carnap, for instance, right? That metaphysics is just general attitude toward life. Maybe that's sort of what Pascal is doing. Pascal was kind of leading a very hedonistic lifestyle, wine, women, and song, very bacchanalian. And then he had a religious experience, which changed everything. And so he said about himself, his work, pensées, kind of thoughts or ruminations or thinking abouts, was in some ways his first draft of what he was going to write, which was going to be a work on apologetics. He was moving towards theology and away from mathematics. And so this is this weird transition point. He never got around to it. He died before then. But he's laying the groundwork for a lot of stuff that comes later. Pragmatism, Heidegger, so on and so forth. So it's really interesting stuff. So let's just dive right in here. So this is page 356. Our soul is thrown into the body. We've talked before, Heidegger, we're thrown into a world, this thrownness, whereas Heidegger talks about fallenness, right? So for Blaise then, our soul is thrown into the body. Notice here we also have the dichotomy between soul and body. So we're building sort of off this Platonic groundwork that, the mind is a separate thing from the body. The body is a prison house of the soul, so on and so forth. And Blaise is sort of echoing some of those same sentiments here. Our soul is thrown into the body, where it finds number, time, and dimensions. Now, we've talked about that before as well. Remember Kant, our mind comes already equipped. These are these primary structures of understanding, or concepts of understanding, structures of the mind that we come already equipped with. Our mind is already looking to experience the world in 4 dimensions. Time, dimensions. So our soul is thrown into this body. Once in this body, it finds number, time, dimensions. It then reasons about this and calls it nature or necessity and can believe nothing else. So notice here, like pragmatism, we have the experience first, then the thinking about, the reasoning about comes second. Unity, when joined to the infinite, does not increase it at all any more than a foot when added to an infinite length. The finite annihilates itself in the presence of the infinite and becomes a pure nothing, just like our mind when confronted with God. If God does exist, God would be so far beyond our understanding that we wouldn't be able to, through reason, understand God. That he's saying, look, we don't really have a concept of infinity and perfection. They're too far beyond us. And so we can't rationally prove the existence of something that's so far beyond our thinking and beyond our capacity. Our mind is finite. It's like a drop of water in an ocean. It's too massive. It's too great to comprehend, to understand. And so there's no way we could prove God. We know that there is an infinite, and yet we are ignorant of its nature. Even in mathematics, infinity is kind of this big thing that's just kind of lurking out there. There's no real comprehension or understanding of it. Yes, numbers go on forever, for all of infinity. What's that really mean? It's just this massive thing that almost loses meaning because it's so big. It's the infinite. We're finite. We can't wrap our heads around. We can't have an experience of it. At least not intellectually, which is why he starts with soul instead of intellect. Later, we do not know either the existence or the nature of God because he has neither extension nor limits. Right? God, if God exists, is beyond this dimensionality and temporality and the way that we experience everything else. So we can't possibly experience God's nature the way that we experience the rest of nature. We've got to come about it in some other way if we're to experience it at all, if there is a thing out there to experience at all. And so he's writing from a Christian perspective, as were Anselm and as were Aquinas. But again, there's nothing specially Christian about their defense for God. Their God is just God. Answering the first question, not the second. Who then, right? So Pascal's already saying, look, religion, belief in God, unreasonable. Unreasonable. Not able to be reasoned. Not able to be comprehended. It's not that type of an understanding. So who then will blame Christians, or any other God believer, for not being able to provide reasons for their belief, since they profess a religion for which they cannot provide a rational basis? So if you find an honest God believer, right, someone who actually believes in God, and let's talk about Christianity specifically. I have friends who are Christians, and they will, in moments of honesty, admit to me, look, the stories are ridiculous. Now, for them, that's part of what proves they must be true. They're so ridiculous that they're unbelievable. No one would believe them unless they actually were true. Like a guy died in the most gruesome way ever known to man. One of. Drawn and quartering was pretty bad too, but crucifixion's right up there. And then 3 days later was alive again? That's ridiculous. That's unreasonable. You can't reasonably comprehend that. That's beyond our understanding intellectually. Or that this same person who was also God, person and God, okay, fine, that this same individual who is God was born in the middle of Nowheresville to no acclaim whatsoever. That's ridiculous. Like the two biggest stories of Christianity are ridiculous stories. That does not disprove them. Pascal is saying, but if we believe this, we can't then give rational claims for why we believe this, but we also can't therefore be ridiculed for not being able to give rational basis for this. It's beyond rational understanding. And so again, that's why we're not proving the existence of God. We're doing something else. So he goes on. Let us say then either God is or God is not. But which side shall we incline toward? Reason cannot settle anything here. There is an infinite chaos which separates us. Instead, what's happening? A game is being played. The inventor of game theory is going to use game theory to support the claim that you should believe in God. It's a wager. A game is being played where at the far end of this infinite distance, the coin will come down heads or tails. How will you bet? Reason will not enable you to decide either way or rule out either alternative. It's a coin flip. Either God exists or God doesn't. One of those is the case, the other is not the case, but we don't know which one's which. Just like in an actual coin flip. So, if I were to flip a coin, actually no, I'm not even going to flip the coin. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to flip the coin tomorrow. So what I want you to do is come up with a pro-con list for choosing heads and a pro-con list for choosing tails. I want you to come up with good reasons, good justification to support calling heads, and good justification, good support for calling tails. And you're going to look at me like it makes no sense. What I'm asking of you makes no logical sense. It's not reasonable. It's not rational. There's no pro-con list to choosing heads or tails. One is not more reasonable than the other. It's a chance, a 50-50 proposition. You just choose one and hope for the best. You have no control over whether it's going to be heads or tails, just like you have no control over whether there's God or not. Remember, you don't have control over truth. At best, you have control over justification and belief. And here, Pascal's already saying, but justification, you can't get at it through reason, at least not in the standard sense. So either God exists or God doesn't. God, no God. You don't have control over that. But just like the coin toss, what you do have control over is choosing heads or choosing tails. Now the reasonable thing, the most reasonable thing, is you're going to wait. I flip the coin, wait for it to come down and land. Ah, tails. That's the most reasonable thing, is waiting. But that's also not really an option. That's the option Pascal thinks the agnostic is trying to do. The agnostic is going to try to wait until the coin hits the ground before calling it. And you can't do that. That's illegitimate. That's an inherent rule of tossing a coin. I don't have to say it. I don't have to say, call it in the air. We all already know you got to call it in the air. There's no chance if you're not calling it in the air. There's no game if you're not calling it in the air. You know what it is, but at that point it's too late. You know it's tails. Whoop-de-doo. You waited too long. We all know you have to call it while it's in the air. Same with this decision. I don't have control over whether God exists or not. All I have control over is whether I choose to believe God exists or not. Believe or not believe. Heads or tails. It's going to land on heads or tails. But I have to choose to call heads or call tails. Top of 358. You must bet. It's not voluntary. You're already involved. The coin is already in the air. That's life. We've been tossed, thrown into the thing called life. We're already involved. We can't wait for it to hit the ground. It's too late at that point. And so then let us weigh up the gain and the loss in choosing heads, that God exists. Let's presume let's say I choose to believe God exists. And I happen to be right, God really does exist. So I call heads and it lands on heads. Yay me, I get positive infinity. I get milk and honey and heaven and mansions and all that. I get it all. I get everything. I chose correctly. I chose heads. It ended up being heads. I win. Let's say I choose to believe God and I'm wrong. There isn't one. I choose heads. It lands on tails. I gain nothing, but I also lose nothing, because dead is dead. The existence of God for Pascal, and as we'll see for Nietzsche as well, the existence of God is necessarily tied to the immortality of the soul. If God exists, then soul immortal. If God does not exist, then soul not immortal. Dead is dead, the end. So you chose to believe in God, you were wrong, but dead is dead, so you haven't lost anything. Presumably. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. Let's say you choose not to believe. And so Pascal here, like William James, about 300 years later, not quite 300 years, 250 years, give or take, is saying, look, belief is a choice. Right? That you choose to believe the cat's alive or the cat's dead in Schrodinger's cat's example. You choose to believe. You choose to believe in Santa Claus or choose not to believe in Santa Claus based on the justification, based upon the evidence, based upon the premises. So you choose not to believe, and you're wrong. There is a God. Well, you lose. And you lose quite a bit. You lose everything. You now have negative infinity because dead is not dead, and you chose poorly. Now let's presume you choose not to believe, and you're right. There is no God. Congratulations, dead is still dead. You don't gain or lose anything. And so this is Pascal's wager. You're making a bet. You're taking a chance. This thing's multi-layered. Most people don't get into all the layers that this thing has. Whew. So, let's take worst case scenario first. Let's presume wrong. Let's presume you choose heads and it lands on tails. You choose heads, it lands on tails. Okay? Now let's presume you choose tails and it lands on heads. You choose tails, it lands on heads. Now if I give you the option between nothing and negative everything, which one would you rather have? Nothing. So worst case scenario, you're better believing than not believing. Just in case you're wrong, it's hedging your bets. Now let's presume you're right. Let's presume you choose heads and you're right. It really is heads. And let's presume you choose tails and it really is tails. Now the choice is between nothing and positive everything. Positive infinity. Which one of those would you rather have? I feel like I'm pausing like in Dora or something. That's right. You'd rather have positive infinity. I won't do it in Spanish. I don't think I know the Spanish word for infinity. Nada is the nothing. Oh well. So again, best case scenario, you're also better off choosing to believe than not believe. You choose heads, even if it's tails, you're not out anything. So don't gain anything. You choose heads, and if you're right, you get it all. So it's a safer bet to believe rather than not believe. Notice this is not a proof. He's not giving you good justification for believing. He's just saying, look, it's a safer bet. Just like if you're at the roulette table, it's safer bet to bet red or to bet black than it is any particular number. Notice how weak his conclusion is. And if you got a weak conclusion, your argument itself can be a bit weaker as well. It doesn't take as much to convince you, hey, maybe God exists. Versus God exists. Or God doesn't exist. Like he's sort of, in a weird way, speaking the agnostic's language, even though he's quite critical of the agnostic. And he's even more critical later on in the excerpt from the same work that's in the other section of this textbook. But it doesn't end here. This isn't the end of the story. Because he goes on to say, the very bottom of page 358, this result, the result of whether you choose to believe or not believe, has demonstrative force. Demonstrative force when? Right here and now. This is about after you're already gone. This is you die, bam, what's next? Pascal is saying, but this choice to believe or not believe has ramifications right now. Demonstrative force right now. So, we need to add to this, if you choose to believe right here, right now, that's better. Whether there is a God or not. Your life is better. Now, he's not saying your life becomes perfect. He's not saying you get the mansions, the milk, and the honey now. He's saying, look, take it from me. There's some testimonial here with Pascal. Look, take it from me. I've lived both lives. I've lived the life of not belief and the life of belief. The life of not belief seemed pretty awesome until I lived the life of belief. And I'm here to tell you the life of belief is better than the life of unbelief. So these get negatives. Now, it will cost you some things. Like we talked about with Anselm, it's probably going to cost you things like time and money and so on and so forth. You're going to sacrifice for this thing. You're going to sacrifice for others. He says at the end, here on page 359, right, he talks about passions. Given this, if you still choose to not believe, your inability to believe comes from your passions, because reason moves you to believe. Reason moves you to believe. It's better off if you're right, and you're better off if you're wrong. And you're better off here and now too. Now this is sort of like the billboards on 71 South on the way to Cincinnati. There's the two billboards, right? Which then named the soccer rivalry between the Columbus Crew and Cincinnati FC, I think it is. Not SC, they're FC. The Hell is Real rivalry. So the one billboard says, where would you spend eternity if you died today? The next one, hell is real. It's a fear tactic. But to some extent, that's what Pascal is saying too. Like, look, I don't know if hell is real, but just in case it is, I'm going to choose to believe God rather than not believe God so that I stay out of hell. Some then have been like, whoa, Pascal, that seems kind of like an illegitimate reason to believe. He sort of addresses that. This is in the other, well, let me finish with this part of the excerpt, then go to the other part of the excerpt to show you how that's not exactly legitimate criticism. He says, here's what you're going to sacrifice. Here's what you're going to lose if you choose to live the life of belief rather than the life of unbelief. What harm will come to you if you make this choice? You'll be faithful, honest, humble, grateful, a doer of good works, a good friend, sincere and true. Well, sounds pretty miserable, right? Now, Pascal is suggesting, not coming out and saying, but suggesting that the life of unbelief cannot have these things. Pascal's much more concerned about how you actually live your life rather than what you say. He would have real issue with the people who claim belief, but then try to cut each other off in the parking lot to leave temple or mosque or church. They're not living life as if they believe. And so then we get that as if, like we had with Hume and like we get with the pragmatists. Living life as if. Living life as if you believe God. Living life as if you believe not God. Because if no God, then no eternity. So why are you bothering being a good friend, sincere and true and all the honest and all that nonsense? You may as well go on and get yours here and now because that's all there is. It'd be unreasonable, stupid, ridiculous to care about other people unless you're just storing up treasures in heaven or something along those lines. You're wasting your time. You're sacrificing for nothing. You should be selfish. You should be living for you because you've only got 70, 80 years. Here's what you're going to give up. And remember, Pascal's speaking from personal experience here. Here's what you're going to give up if you're going to do this life of belief thing. Admittedly, you will not dwell amid tainted pleasures, glory, and luxury, but you'll have others. You can't be selfish. Do the wine, women, and song thing. That's now out the window if you're choosing to live this life of belief of God. Let's go to the other excerpt. Page 780. And again, much of this is directed towards the agnostic, not necessarily the atheist. The atheist has at least made a choice. Okay, you're choosing this, fine. You've at least called tails. Pascal can respect that. He thinks you're making a poor choice. It's a bad guess. It's a bad bet. And what's interesting is that maybe this is just the people I surround myself with. I don't know, but I've asked classes in the past as well since I started covering this topic about 7 years ago or so. It's unusual to find an atheist over the age of about 70, 75. Find me an old atheist. One of the most famous atheists in the history of philosophy, Anthony Flew, F-L-E-W. I mean, he was one of these folks who would like go to college campuses and debate the God believer folks and so on and so forth. Then he got sick with a terminal disease. And suddenly, he wasn't as staunch of an atheist anymore. He was like, well, there may be some place for something like God. There may be a place for something like that. He was hedging his bets. He was doing the Pascal thing. When you're 20, you think you'll never die, so you can live the life of debauchery and so forth. You can live the life of non-belief because you figure, well, 50 years from now, I can always change my mind. I can do the life of belief thing, and then boom, I'm good. When you're 70, 75, 80, that coin's a whole lot closer to hitting the ground. And so maybe you change your call at that point. Tails, 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 tails. Ooh, heads. Give me heads just in case. Give me heads. And Pascal's going to say, look, there is some legitimacy to that. Some legitimacy to this belief thing, regardless of when it occurs. Because it has demonstrative force, remember. It changes your life here and now, Pascal thinks. 780. This is the third to last paragraph, and this is where his pointed criticism of the agnostic. Remember, they're the most reasonable. But he's poo-pooed reason from the beginning. Reason only gets you so far. Reason doesn't get you to God. Reason's not what's thrown into the body. Reason is part of the body, I think, for Pascal. The soul is this extra thing that gets thrown in. I don't know why I'm speaking this weird voice. The immortality of the soul, which remember is tied to this existence of God thing. The immortality of the soul is something of such powerful importance, and which touches us so deeply, that one would have to have lost all feeling, not to care about knowing whether it's a reality or not. In some ways, this is sort of like that authenticity, inauthenticity that Heidegger talked about. Authentic being has at the forefront the question of the meaning of being. Inauthenticity tries to ignore it. La 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 la. Not worried about that. I'm just going to do what everybody else does because that's what we do. I'm going to live in the world, going to live of the world, not in the world, and so on and so forth. Pascal's like, look, agnostic, you can claim all you want to be like, I'm going to take the reasonable position, which is to take neither position. I haven't yet seen a strong enough argument in support of God or in support of not God. Yeah, no kidding, you're never going to. It's just not going to happen. And even if it were to happen, what would that say about something like belief or something like faith? Would it actually be good for Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism? Name your God-believing religion. Would it actually be good if they could prove the existence of God? Or doesn't that then negate the need for faith? Anyway, this immortality of the soul thing is of such importance that if you don't care about knowing whether the soul is immortal or not, if you don't care about making a decision to choose to believe or not believe, then you must have lost all feeling. Period. All feeling about everything. You're living life like, meh. Hey, agnostic friend, do you want to go to the art museum? Meh, sure, whatever. Yeah, no, I don't care. Hey, gee, do you want to go to local sporting event? Meh, I don't know, whatever, sure. not passionate about anything, lost all feeling. The atheist at least has feeling. They're passionate about, no God. The God believer passionate about, yep, God. The agnostic, I don't know, I'm waiting. Just waiting for, good justification for either one. That again, they're never going to get. They're never going to get good enough justification to believe or to not believe either one. They don't even care passionately enough to make a decision one way or the other about the immortality of the soul. They're probably not going to make much of a decision about where to go to eat either, because they're not passionate about anything. How about Chinese? Yeah, sure, okay, whatever. Mexican? Yep, yeah, okay. Yeah. And we all have friends who are meh. Pascal's saying, chances are they're probably the agnostics. Meh, yeah, okay. I don't know, whatever. How's the whole online thing going? Well, whatever, so class, it's fine. You missed anybody? Well, I don't know, sure, whatever, I don't know. All of our actions, this is still that same paragraph on 780, all of our actions and thoughts cannot but take a completely different course depending on whether there will be eternal joys for us to look forward to or not. This changes everything. This decision right here changes the entire course of your life, says Pascal. And again, to tie it to Heidegger, authenticity and authenticity. You choose which life to lead and which life to live. Authenticity, better. Does it come with more problems? Sure, because now you're reflective and self-aware about everything. You watch cartoons and read kids' books and think, wow, I could use this in a philosophy class, for instance. Presuming I'm living an authentic life, who knows? Instead of ever turning it off. All of our actions and thoughts cannot but take a completely different course depending on whether there will be eternal joys for us to look forward to or not. If there are, then we don't live for ourselves. If there aren't, then we should live for ourselves. The only thing that makes sense. Which is, in an interesting way, going to be Nietzsche's starting point. Nietzsche is going to agree with all of this except right here. He's going to switch these two and say that life here and now is better for the non-believer and worse for the believer because of the sacrifice bit and all of that. He can agree with all the rest of this stuff because he's sure that there isn't a God. He doesn't give premises followed by a conclusion for it. It's the starting point. We'll get to that later. This is still Pascal right now. I don't want to skip over Kierkegaard either. Because Kierkegaard's crazy. So one cannot possibly proceed sensibly or with any judgment if one does not make decisions with this matter, which matter? The immortality of the soul. With this matter in view, settling it should be our ultimate objective. Just like for Heidegger, everything points back to the question of the meaning of being. For Pascal, everything points back to, is the soul immortal or not? Do I choose to believe God exists or choose to believe that God does not exist? Everything points back to that, because that determines everything else. And so our primary interest, our first duty then is to enlighten ourselves on this subject, since on it depends the entire course of our conduct. Now back up to the first full paragraph on that one, page 780, which is the paragraph immediately preceding the immortality of the soul one. To mount a solid objection, they, right, the atheist and so forth, the defense attorney who's knocking down all the premises of the God believers and so forth, they would have to insist that they had made every effort to seek the truth on every side, including religious instruction offered by the church. What he's saying here is really, look, man, give it a try. What have you got to lose? And so it's sort of what he's suggesting here is the scientific experiments and scientific method with regards to religion, with regards to belief, with regards to faith. Hey, give it a try, atheist. Why not? If you're so convinced you're right, you shouldn't be afraid of this thing anyway. And, quite frankly, I think that he would give the believer the same piece of advice about living life like you don't. Hey, don't take my word for it. So back in the day, there was this TV show called Reading Rainbow, hosted by LeVar Burton, where at the end of the episode, it was a PBS thing, of course, because that's all I watch because I'm nerdy. So at the end of the episode, then there would be these kids who would recommend books. They'd be like, hey, here's this great book I just read, and here's kind of some of the stuff that happens. And they would end with, but don't take my word for it, right? Read it yourself, right? Go to your local library, blah, blah, blah. Fine. Pascal's saying, look, don't take my word for it. My belief can't be your belief. You know, make the faith your own, blah, 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 right? What you need to do is you need to try this thing out on your own, right? If you currently don't believe, try believing. Just go through the motions of the thing. Do what believers do for a while and see if it changes you. And if you're a believer, go try not believing. This is is it Rumspringa, I think it is, in the Amish faith, right? Where at a certain age you're thrown out into the world. Go experience the other, right? Go give it a try. And if that's for you, fine. You're not Amish anymore, we'll shun you, right? There's other issues here. But at least it's like, look, we want to expose you to the other so that if you don't choose that, you come back even stronger. He's saying, look, man, give it a try. And by extension, he would have to say something like, look, don't just give Christianity a try either. Right? Remember, he's convinced that Christianity is correct. Okay? So then he shouldn't be afraid if you try the other stuff too. Go try Judaism. Go try Buddhism. Go try Hindu. Go try it all. What have you got to lose? Right? Give it a try for, and I'm making these numbers up, I don't know, for a month. Right? So for the month of June, try being Jewish. Do what Jewish people do and see if it changes you. See if it speaks to you. Right? See if you're different and better than you were before. And then July, give Islam a try. Why not? Again, what have you got to lose? Because something is going to be correct. There's a truth out there. And so you've got to go through these personal experiences and journeys to figure out what it is. Seek truth on every side, or you're not really seeking truth. And if you give it a try and it doesn't work, now you can mount a solid objection because you've tried it. You've walked that walk. Right? You can't tell me that, all right, we do this all the time with the kids, right? We'll fix a new dish and be like, I don't like it. Have you tried it yet? Have you taken a few bites? Have you allowed your palate to get used to the flavor and the taste? Because until you try it, you can't tell me you don't like it. Until you try atheism, you can't tell me it's incorrect because you haven't tried it yet. Until you've tried Buddhism, you can't tell me it's incorrect because you haven't tried it yet. Until you try Christianity, you can't tell me it's incorrect because you haven't tried it yet. Judaism, Islam, Hare Krishna, Mormon, Church of Latter-day Saints, not Mormonism, Church of Latter-day Saints, Rastafarianism, all of it. There are so many religious beliefs out there, and since belief is a choice, you can choose to believe those things at least for a time, at least go through the motions, give them a try, see what happens. It's only the immortality of your soul at stake here. It's only the entire direction of the rest of your life at stake here. Which is why earlier on in the other excerpt, right, Pascal's like, well, but maybe I'm risking too much. Are you? Because look at what you potentially have to gain. Yes, you're risking your life, but that's just one as contrasted with infinity. That's one drop in the ocean. That's what it's costing you. It's costing you 70 to 80 years in the midst of all of eternity. It ain't that much time. Not that long after all. Let me see. Let me just check my notes real quick, see if there's anything else about Pascal that I want to mention here. I don't think so. Because what you're staking is finite. This is middle 358. So you're staking something that's finite on something potentially infinite. Yeah. And in the world of God and so forth, and faith and belief and all of that, he's really laying the groundwork for Kierkegaard. And Kierkegaard is going to want to talk about this shift and this change from objective truth to subjective truth, which is going to be an interesting reversal from someone like Plato and even Aristotle, right? Aristotle's like, all truth is subjective. Objective, who needs it? There is no such thing. Plato, objective truth is where it's at. Kierkegaard, objective truth is nice, but even better than that is subjective truth. Which then reminds me of the 10 Commandments of philosophy I gave you at the very beginning of the course, right? Not just love the truth, but also live the truth. Kierkegaard's going to say the living of it's much more important than the loving of it. But that's for next time. On those pages, Kierkegaard is in the 300s, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Kierkegaard 376. See you next time.